So that brings us to the final category of sedative hypnotics for today. Before we compare from like a kind of bird's eye view all of these substances, we are now going to talk about the so-called inhalants. So drugs that are used usually by three modes. We're going to talk about them. So usually they're drugs that can be sniffed. So not so much insufflated, like in the case of cocaine, like a right, but it's very much, it's almost like a hybrid form of inhalation and insufflation. Okay, and then we have huffing. Okay, and then bagging. These are all forms technically of inhaling certain substances. We're going to talk about many of them, either that have some kind of gas or solvent emission, or like some kind of vapor that is released into the air and that can then be, sniffed, huffed, or put into a bag. And then, okay, whatever the method, okay, the inhalants are generally agreed to be done via inhalation. It's kind of built into their name. Okay, so we're going to get into this. They're also extremely dangerous and way too easy for people, especially kids, to get their hands on. So we'll get on that in a moment here. Hey yo, another wardrobe change. Well, just putting a hat on. I just came straight from the gym. That's why I wasn't kidding when I was saying that for some of these lectures I have to record them literally in parts, kind of like almost like writing a chapter to a book. So sorry about that. It's a little disorienting. I don't mean to do that. It's really my only option for doing this. Okay, so and by the way, I'm still wearing this hat because I wear it at the gym, and if I were to take it off, I would look even worse, believe it or not, than I do now. And for some of you, you're thinking, Carl, calling BS on that. I don't think you could possibly look worse than you do now, right? So, hat or no hat, just kind of relax into it. It's going to be bad anyway. Anyway, what are the inhalants? Okay, the inhalants are a bunch of different things. Okay, most of them are actually very easy to access, with the exception of some industrial materials that actually require some licensing in some cases. But they are comprised of volatile solvents, aerosols, anesthetics, and so-called nitrites, that we are going to define in a moment, that produce usually for secondary purposes, psychoactive, intoxicating effects. The only major exception here would be the anesthetics. Okay, they produce depressant effects that are very similar to the sedative hypnotics and to alcohol. Okay, not exactly the same, but they operate very similar by means of mechanism of action that the sedative hypnotics and alcohol operate. The primary modes of use, as we'll see on the next page, I'll just jump to that right away. Okay, these modes of use involve sniffing, huffing, and bagging. There are other hybrid modes of use. For example, like a construction worker, say, might put a gas-soaked rag in their sleeve and discreetly sniff or huff. Right? There are different ways of, like, the basic idea. Okay, is that you are taking a material that has either evaporated or whose vapors can be directly inhaled, okay, without combusting them, okay, and inhaling them. Okay, sometimes you combust them. You don't always have to. Okay, but these are the three primary methods: sniffing, huffing, and bagging. Okay, a high dose exposure to any of these chemicals will cause intoxication, again, similar to the effects of alcohol. These are generally products that can be abused by inhalation, including gasoline, glue, paint, lighter fluid, spray cans, so aerosols, nail polish, and what used to be called whiteout or correction fluid. Just fun little fact here. You're less likely today to find formulations of this correction fluid. In fact, it's often not even a fluid anymore. It's something different by way of substance. But anyway, that's largely been replaced by a newer, kind of safer anti-inhalant type of substance. Okay, so let's provide an overview of the types of inhalants and some examples of them. The first major category is known as volatile solvents. Okay, generally under this you would find petroleum, acetone, and toluene. I might not be pronouncing that right. Someone pronounced that to me once, and I thought I had it. But anyway, these are chemicals, liquid or semi-solid, which dissolve other substances. So we use these substances to dissolve others. They include paint, paint thinner and remover, nail polish remover, correction fluid, various glues and or cements. Okay? Then we have aerosols, propellants, and gases. Okay? The two major ones for us being butane and propane. Okay? And here, examples under here would include spray paint, hairspray, lighters, and whipped cream, or at least the small aerosol canisters within them that allow them to be sprayed in that format. And then we have the anesthetics, which include nitrous oxide and ether, primarily as the main two examples. Just really as examples, more generally, just any current and former medical anesthetics, anything that is used in a medical context for anesthetic purposes. And then finally, the nitrites, the two main ones being isoamyl and isobutyl. More generally, we'll look at one called amyl butyrate later. These are sometimes called poppers. By the way, it's old school term, poppers. That's why I've highlighted it here. More recently, in the cannabis world, a popper refers to something very different than it does here. When we come back to talking about cannabis, I'll mention what the distinction is. But for now, a popper in this context is a much older, some might say archaic, if you're being mean to people who are a little older, a much more archaic use of the word popper, in this case applied to solvents. Okay, so let's go into a little more detail into each of these categories, namely volatile solvents, gaseous anesthetics, and the nitrites. So first of all, volatile solvents, okay? One thing to note about these solvents, okay, is that there was a time, I believe this was either the late 80s or early 90s, where, like 2 or 3 cases, say, in some community or like spread across a few communities, were reported of children who were using volatile solvents like they could easily find at home, like nail polish remover or, paint thinner, just stuff you could find in a garage or in a medicine cabinet or, or in mom's, makeup bag, whatever it is. Okay, not necessarily mom's makeup bag. The world's different today, but you know what I mean. Okay, you would find these products pretty much anywhere. Just paint. Okay, it's just like it's just anywhere. Okay, but you would get these isolated cases. Okay, not epidemic, even though that word was used. Okay, by these overly kind of sensationalist and like pseudo informative news agencies and news articles that would report on, just how bad this epidemic was. And part of their reports included more or less detailed instructions about what all of these substances were. Hey, kids are getting high on all of these different substances, basically listing off, in catalog format with like kids able to take notes. Oh, cool. So I could use paint thinner to get high. Great. I don't have to, I don't have to buy some off, like rando Jimmy, right, who might steal my money or like just give me oregano or something. I can get this myself, okay? Yeah, so news articles were not only showing people or kids, right, not just news articles, by the way, but like news segments. So the kids were watching this on television, okay? Like, we're not only showing kids what substances to use to get high, but also where to find them. This, by the way, is a common theme that will also apply to other types of inhalants in some cases, as we'll see later, but for the most part, it applies the most to volatile solvents, okay? So what I'm trying to say is, like, in a case like this, right, the news, or I guess like attempts to psycho-educate the public by overly sensationalizing a few isolated cases actually ended up creating a kind of epidemic that they were falsely reporting initially. Anyway, most abusers of volatile solvents tend to be very young. Okay, like I said, they're readily available and easily stolen if small, and they're inexpensive. Okay, unless you're buying them in like industrial sized quantities. They tend to also be used by those living in poverty for the same reasons because they're not very expensive and they're easy to obtain. Okay, whether legally or criminally. Okay, the laws to prohibit sales to minors just tend to be ineffective. Right, product warnings are used as basically inhalant identifiers. It's like you know. Basically, anything that tells a kid not to inhale something is like an indication that, maybe I should try that. Maybe that'll get me high if I just do a little bit. And kids essentially learn how to kind of gradually reach a desired dose once they see the label on there. Again, this approach inadvertently becomes just another way to teach kids not only how to abuse it, but where to find it. Far better is a more systematic approach to psychoeducation and to harm reduction. But anyway, that shows up in other courses and maybe in earlier modules in this course, okay, if I remember correctly. Next, we have the gaseous anesthetics. So mainly, there are a few that'll be very familiar to you. So first is nitrous oxide or laughing gas that was first used in the 1800s. It's still used today for light anesthesia, especially by dentists. Wasn't kidding, by the way, when I said I just worked out. There we go. I'm not just flexing, by the way. Flex, no pun intended. Just worked out. Okay. By the way, get used to it, okay? I'm a dad joke machine, and it's brutal and it's cringy, but it's just gonna keep coming. So I mean, like, why not? Anyway, the gaseous anesthetics are also used as a propellant, okay, for commercial and home whipping cream dispensers. Sometimes affectionately called whippets by a subculture called juggalos that, thank goodness, have been receding into oblivion where it belongs. I'll show you a picture of what these lovely humans look like in a second. There they are. Hey, look, I'm all about peace and love and just universal kind of acceptance of anyone, whatever. As long as you ain't harming anybody or yourself unnecessarily, I'm cool with pretty much anything. But the kind of stuff that goes down at these sorts of juggalo festivals, as usual, Google it, okay? YouTube it, check it out. I'm not kidding. Anyway, there's a lot that goes down at these places, a lot of really just dangerous polysubstance use. But one of the most dangerous ones, and the relevant ones for this purpose, is that juggalos tend to use these little propellants that show up in an aerosol can, which they have affectionately called whippets, right? And every time that they blast some of it back in inhalant form, they shout "woo woo," and that's basically their saying. They're a special bunch, and every day you discover one more majestic layer of the human fabric. Okay. All right. So now we have moved on to the nitrites. Not as common today, by the way. The nitrites were very common in the early to late 80s, something a little bit in the early 90s, especially as a drug that was used to, let's just say, facilitate, sexual activity. The nitrites cause rapid dilation of the arteries and therefore reduce blood pressure in the brain. This can trigger feelings of faintness, semi or unconsciousness. It also relaxes, get ready for it, the sphincter muscles. It enhances performance in the form of erection and can make sex more pleasurable. It's often a kind of club drug, especially among gay men. I shouldn't say it is often, because it has really kind of gone down in use since, like I said, like the early 90s. It was a far more popular drug back in the day, as we say. And There's this weird story about why we used to call them poppers. Well, as if I was part of this community. I was not, I swear. Okay. There's a reason why, I guess, the the substance use and abuse information world used to call them poppers. Well, this came as a street name from actual users who would get these in small vials, okay, in some cases, put them into brown bags or some other container, smash them, okay, creating a popping sound, open the bag, and inhale, okay, through the bag, through the evaporating vapors. Popper, okay, it means something very different, obviously, okay, um, than it does compared to what it means in the cannabis world. But anyway, that will come later, like I said. And as usual, sorry, quick break for me. Again, I should be more professional here. Every time I switch between slides, I could hit the pause button, but I'm not, right? It's a tough time, right? Okay, anyway, when you see a slide like this, mechanism of action, pay close attention. Not only is it an extremely important testable question, okay, even though I'm not designing your tests, I know it will be important for testing purposes. It's also an important thing to know in terms of a like key takeaway, in terms of like clinical, you know, like ground level psychopharmacology knowledge. You don't have to be an expert in this stuff. You just need to know roughly what this is doing and how it is doing it at the level of the brain. So anyway, again, like the sedative hypnotics and alcohol, it is a central nervous system depressant. It affects the GABA neurotransmitter as well as dopamine, which makes it particularly rewarding. Okay, the effects of volatile solvents are almost immediate, but also tend to wear off quickly within a few minutes. What does that mean, right? Well, we have both rapid onset because of inhalation, and we have short duration of action. Okay, what does that mean in terms of a dependence liability combo? Remember, okay, that means high risk of psychological dependence because rapid onset, and high risk of physical dependence because short duration of action. Okay? So, in other words, the inhalants, okay, or drugs used by inhalation, in this case, especially the volatile solvents, are extremely addictive. Okay? Their effects tend to include lightheadedness or like head rush, distorted perception, especially vision, reduced inhibitions and impulsive risk-taking behavior. In some cases, hallucinations, or other distortions of perception, and then just a general loss of coordination. Okay, So let's go through some of the primary dangers associated with the inhalants. First of all, so many of them can set you on fire, literally. I don't mean like, oh, I'm on fire with happiness. They are flammable, especially the gases, okay? Like, it's brutal. So many of these are flammable. The volatile solvents are flammable. The gaseous anesthetics are flammable, okay? Like, you got to be careful with these things. The aerosols are flammable. Many of them can cause sudden heart failure. Many of them can lead to overdose, and it's an even higher risk if they're combined with other depressants like alcohol, which they are. By the way, that juggalo culture that I mentioned, big issue there. Another issue is kidney damage. By the way, as a quick jump cut, I had to. My kids were just coming in, and if I didn't deal with that, it would have been a circus. Okay, so another issue is kidney damage, brain damage, okay, very serious, peripheral nerve damage, so damage of the peripheral nerve system, irritation of the respiratory tract. No kidding, by the way, inhalants are definitely going to damage the respiratory tract because that's primarily how you are administering them to your body. They cause severe headaches and also potential death by suffocation. So really serious, not something you want to go try out just for fun. Okay, so we're going to spend the last two slides here for today comparing alcohol, which we discussed last week, or at least last class. It wasn't last week for me, it was a couple of days ago, with the two sedative hypnotic subtypes that we talked about today, namely the inhalants, which we'll do first, and then the benzodiazepines, which we'll do second. Okay, so first, compared to alcohol, okay, there's a greater likelihood of lethal consequences, okay, due to acute toxicity with the inhalants. Okay, that's really important, by the way, because alcohol is very harmful. Okay, but with respect to acute toxicity, the inhalants tend to be a bit more harmful, especially since it's far more difficult to control for dosage and the means by which, or the route of administration, whereby these substances are administered to the body. Second, there's a high likelihood of nervous system damage, both the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system from chronic use of solvents. So in other words, use over time. There's a greater likelihood of perceptual distortions and hallucinations and delusions with the inhalants. The dependence liability is similar to alcohol, including the possibility of a withdrawal syndrome. It's important to know that both exert similar long-term effects on the brain, especially in terms of possible damage, like loss of brain mass and large fissures. That's not good, by the way, okay? But the effects occur much more quickly with the inhalants. Again, greater acute toxicity, meaning it takes a lot less to achieve, or at least the same type of neurological damage is achieved far more quickly with the inhalants as compared to alcohol. But, okay, the inhalants are cheaper and more accessible, which in and of itself represents a very key danger. Sure, like I was saying before, that alcohol, compared to a lot of the really scary drugs out there, like, crystal meth and heroin or whatever, okay? I mean, alcohol is just far more accessible and it is normalized in our culture. Well, the inhalants, inhalant use is not normalized, but inhalants themselves, right? The products that are used to, by some people in our society as inhalants are totally normalized and acceptable and accessible. But unlike alcohol, they're much cheaper and they're much more accessible. So that represents a clear danger. And then finally, comparing alcohol to the benzodiazepines. Okay, so first of all, benzodiazepine effects tend to persist, okay, much longer due to half-life factors, okay? Also, benzodiazepine withdrawal is delayed and, as compared with alcohol, relatively mild. The exception here are the barbiturates, which are, of course, not on this slide. We're not comparing alcohol to the barbiturates, but benzodiazepines versus alcohol, okay? The withdrawal with alcohol is far worse, specifically because alcohol withdrawal is life-threatening. There's also no acute withdrawal syndrome with the benzodiazepines. Okay, there's no hangover with the benzodiazepines. Benzodiazepines are less immediately detectable. For example, you can't detect them on the breath. Um, they are also, in some cases, covered by healthcare plans, and they can take, you know, they can help to mitigate anxiety and worry, um, and kind of like just the stress and the stress itself that comes along with trying to stop drinking. Okay, due to pressure from others. So sometimes we refer to this as like taking the heat off, right? Quitting drinking can be a really difficult process. So not only can we use the benzodiazepines to help someone to withdraw safely from alcohol, but possibly also to deal with the psychosocial distress involved in quitting in the first place. Okay, but the benzodiazepines have variable ability to produce euphoria. Okay, this is also not just euphoria, but also one of the main purposes therapeutically. Their anxiolytic purpose is also perhaps better done by other treatments like the antidepressants or by therapy. Also, remember that benzodiazepines are used to combat withdrawal syndrome of other depressants, specifically, again, like alcohol. Okay. Um, I'm not responsible for tests, so I took over the part about like recording lectures and stuff. But I'm not responsible for your homework either, so you'll have to check with Amanda about this. I'm just gonna sit here and say thank you again for your patience. If I haven't said so already in my introductory video, I just want to apologize once again. Not like I have any huge control over it. It's a neurological thing. Some of you may have noticed that I have like this motor tic. It's a nonverbal Tourette syndrome. It's sometimes called chronic motor tic syndrome. And you'll see that I often like snap my mouth open like that, or I kind of move like this, or I kind of shrug a shoulder. It's most often observable in like facial twitching. That's just part of the disorder that I have, and it sucks. It's way under more control. I guess it's more under control than it used to be, but it still sucks. It's not fun to live with, and sometimes it's a little painful. But I know it can be a little disorienting for some people to look at. So I apologize for that, and as always, thank you for your time. I hope this was useful to you. And if it wasn't, you just wasted 104 minutes and 46 seconds of your time. Take it easy.